Whispers in the dark. The desert wind brought a disquieting song that night, a stark contrast to the usual mournful sighs through the Joshua trees, laced with a frantic edge. Beau Montgomery checked Diablo, the big paint gelding, who pawed restlessly beneath him, blowing plumes of vapor into the cold air. He'd been pushing for the ranch before moonset, but this unfamiliar sound, it scratched at the periphery of his senses. Though faint, nearly swallowed by the desolate expanse, Beau's years alone beneath a canopy of stars had honed his instincts. He swept his gaze across the landscape. Only scattered scrub and the waning moon's ghostly reflection on the sand. Then it came again, a stifled whimper, quickly silenced. He urged Diablo onward, his hand dropping to the well-worn grip of his Colt Peacemaker. The sound seemed to emanate from the south, from the abandoned wagon trail, untouched by travelers for years. A rare and unwelcome curiosity pricked at him. He wasn't one to court trouble, but that whimper, it resembled a trapped creature, or something far more sinister. He discovered the wagon nestled within a shallow declivity, its canvas cover sealed tight with stout cords. Its wheels were mired deeply in the sand, suggesting a prolonged stay. No embers of fire, no horses, no indication of habitation. Just the oppressive desert silence, broken only by desperate, muffled sounds. Beau dismounted, the saddle leather groaning in protest. Diablo stamped, ears swiveling nervously. The air felt thick, heavy with a foreboding that raised gooseflesh on Beau's arms. He moved cautiously, circling the wagon, senses heightened. The canvas billowed, slightly in the breeze, revealing nothing. The cries were clearer now, whimpers, choked sobs, barely discernible. He reached for a rope, his fingers encountering the rough hemp. It was drawn taut, a strangling cord. Hesitation flickered. This felt like stepping into a snare, yet ignoring those pleas was unthinkable. He drew his knife, the blade flashing in the moonlight, and severed the rope. The canvas drooped, creating a small opening. The stench struck him first, an overpowering, sickly sweetness that threatened to turn his stomach. It reeked of sweat, fear, and something decaying. He peered inside, his eyes struggling to penetrate the gloom. The sight that greeted him chilled him to the bone. The wagon was crammed with women. Young women, their faces drawn and pale, their eyes wide with terror. They were huddled together, bodies bruised and battered, mouths bound with rags. The air vibrated with their stifled cries, a chorus of despair that echoed in Beau's mind. He saw the spark of fear in their eyes. None were familiar faces. They weren't local. In the dimness, he discerned a metallic gleam. A heavy chain, bolted to the wagon floor, secured their ankles. They were captives. Then he noticed the man. He slumped in a corner, his features obscured by shadow. But Beau made out his outline, a large, hulking figure, armed with a rifle. He was either asleep or unconscious. An overturned whiskey bottle lay beside him, its contents staining the floor. Beau said he could ride for help, alert the town. But time was a luxury they didn't possess. These women were running out of it. He reached inside, his hand closing on the rifle stock. He extracted it carefully, avoiding noise, and tossed it into the sand. Then he drew his Peacemaker, the cold steel a familiar reassurance in his palm. He stepped in a wagon, his gaze sweeping across the women's faces. He caught a flicker of hope in their eyes, a stubborn spark of defiance. "I'm getting you out," he said, his voice a low growl. "But silence is paramount. Understand?" They nodded, their eyes locked on him, their trust a burden he willingly bore. He approached the sleeping man, his heart hammering. He was massive, larger than Beau, with hands like meat cleavers. The man blinked, his eyes struggling to focus. He recognized Beau, then the gun in his hand. A sneer contorted his features. "Well now," he slurred, his voice thick with liquor. "What have we got here?" Beau remained silent. He brought the butt of his Peacemaker crashing down on the man's skull. The man grunted, collapsing to the floor, unconscious once more. Beau reholstered his gun and turned to the women. "Need something to cut these chains," he stated. One of the women, a girl with dark eyes and a steely resolve, indicated a small pouch hanging from the man's belt. "He keeps the key there," she rasped. Bo snatched the pouch and rummaged within. He found a small, intricately designed key. He swiftly unlocked the chains, liberating the women from their metallic constraints. "Let's go," he urged, his voice urgent. "We must leave." He helped them from the wagon, one after another, their bodies trembling with weakness. As they stepped into the moonlight, Bo was consumed by a surge of fury, mingled with something dormant, a fierce protectiveness, a burning urge to shield them from the enveloping darkness. He knew, as he led them away from the wagon and into the sheltering embrace of the desert night, that his life had undergone a profound and irreversible shift. The price of freedom. The moon, a jagged fingernail scraping across the inky sky, offered little light. Good. Bo needed every advantage he could get. He'd circled wide, using the sparse scrub brush for cover, until he'd reached the crest of a low ridge overlooking the wagon's path. Two men rode shotgun, rifles cradled in their laps, faces hard and weathered like the desert itself. Bo dismounted, tying Duke to a gnarled mesquite. He drew his Colt Peacemaker, the cold steel a familiar comfort in his palm. He wasn't a gunslinger, never had been, but he knew how to use it. He waited until the wagon was directly below him, the creak of its wheels a morbid lullaby in the still night. Then he slid down the embankment, landing in a crouch. Dust puffed around his boots. "Hold it right there." His voice cracked like a whip. The two men reacted instantly. One swore, fumbling with his rifle. The other, quicker, leveled his weapon at Bo. Before the man could fire, Bo shot him. The bullet found its mark with a sickening thud, and the man slumped forward, lifeless. The second man, momentarily stunned, finally raised his rifle. Bo dove behind the wagon wheel as a shot rang out, splintering within inches from his head. He returned fire, sending a bullet whizzing past the man's ear. The man yelped, dropping his rifle and clutching his bleeding ear. Bo scrambled to his feet, closing the distance. He disarmed the wounded man, slamming the butt of his own Colt into the man's temple. The man crumpled to the ground, unconscious. He spared them no further thought. The real horror, he suspected, lay within the wagon itself. He climbed onto the back, his knife glinting in the moonlight as he sliced through the thick rope securing the canvas cover. He pulled back the canvas, and the stench hit him like a physical blow. Sweat, fear, and something else, something sickly sweet and metallic. His breath hitched. Chained together at the ankles, huddled like frightened animals, were women. Their eyes, wide and haunted, stared back at him. Filthy rags barely concealed their emaciated bodies. Some sobbed silently. Others simply stared, their spirits seemingly broken. "It's all right," Bo said, his voice rough with emotion. "I'm here to help you." He set to work, his knife flashing as he cut through the heavy chains. The women flinched at first, then slowly, tentatively, reached out to him. As he freed the last woman, he noticed one lying motionless in the corner of the wagon. He knelt beside her, his heart sinking. She was small, fragile, her face pale and bruised. A dark stain blossomed on her tattered dress. He gently turned her over. Her eyes were closed, her breathing shallow and ragged. A gasp escaped his lips. It was the faintest of sounds, but it was there. She was alive. He gathered her into his arms, cradling her against his chest. She was light as a feather, her bones sharp beneath his calloused hands. He could feel the faint pulse in her neck, a fragile flutter against the storm raging within him. "We need to get her out of here," he said to the other women, his voice urgent. "Can you walk?" Some nodded, some shook their heads. Bo knew they were weak, dehydrated, traumatized, but they had to try. He couldn't leave them here. He lifted the unconscious woman carefully, trying not to jostle her too much. He carried her out of the wagon and laid her gently on the ground. Her dark hair, matted with dirt and blood, framed her face. He noticed a small, intricate tattoo on her wrist, a delicate flower, almost hidden beneath the grime. He looked back at the women, their faces etched with fear and uncertainty. He met their gazes, one by one, and spoke with a conviction he didn't know he possessed. "I promise you," he said, "I will get you to safety." Sanctuary at Montgomery Ranch. The last mile to Montgomery Ranch felt like 10. Bo shifted Sarah in his arms, careful not to jostle her too much. Her breaths were shallow, ragged things against his chest. He'd bound her wounds as best he could with strips torn from his own shirt, but the crimson stains bloomed anew with every step. The ranch house, a sturdy structure of weathered wood and stone, sat nestled in a small valley, shielded from prying eyes by a thick stand of pines. A plume of smoke curled lazily from the chimney, a beacon of warmth and safety. He kicked open the heavy oak door and stepped inside. The main room was sparsely furnished but clean. A large stone fireplace dominated one wall, radiating a comforting heat. He laid Sarah gently on the worn Navajo rug in front of it. Her eyes fluttered open, glazed with fever. "Safe," he murmured, more to reassure himself than her. "You're safe now." He stoked the fire, adding a few more logs until the flames danced merrily, casting flickering shadows on the walls. Then he fetched water from the well, heating it in a dented tin pot over the fire. He tore more strips from an old cotton sheet, soaking them in the warm water. Kneeling beside her, he began to clean her wounds. She flinched at his touch, a silent scream trapped in her throat. Each bruise, each welt, spoke volumes of the horror she had endured. He worked with meticulous care, his large hands surprisingly gentle. "My name is Bo," he said softly, his voice a low rumble. "Bo Montgomery. What's yours?" She didn't answer, her gaze fixed on some unseen horror. He continued to clean her wounds, his jaw tight with a mixture of anger and compassion. When he was finished, he spread a thick layer of salve on the raw skin, then wrapped her in clean bandages. He pulled a thick woolen blanket over her, tucking it around her chin. Her skin was clammy, her breathing shallow and uneven. He knew he needed to get some food into her, but she seemed too weak to even swallow. He dipped a clean cloth in cool water and dabbed it on her forehead. Her eyelids drooped, and she drifted into a fitful sleep. As the hours passed, Bo stayed by her side, tending the fire and watching over her. Sarah's sleep was anything but restful. She moaned and thrashed, reliving her captivity in vivid, terrifying detail. Words, fragmented and unintelligible, escaped her lips. He heard snippets of shouted orders, cruel laughter, and desperate pleas. Once, she cried out a man's name, that tore at his heart. He held her hand, his callous thumbs stroking her knuckles, trying to soothe her. He felt a strange protectiveness towards this woman, this fragile creature who had been through so much. He didn't know her story, but he knew he would do everything in his power to keep her safe. As dawn approached, Sarah stirred, her eyes fluttering open. She looked around the room, her gaze darting from object to object, as if trying to make sense of her surroundings. When her eyes landed on Bo, a flicker of fear crossed her face. Where am I?" she whispered, her voice raspy. "You're at my ranch," Bo said, his voice gentle. "You're safe here." She stared at him for a long moment, her eyes searching his. He held her gaze, willing her to trust him. Finally, she seemed to relax, a tiny bit of the tension leaving her body. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "You don't have to thank me," Bo said. "Just rest. You need to get your strength back." He brought her a cup of broth, thin but nourishing. She drank it slowly, her eyes never leaving his. As she finished, a glimmer of something, perhaps hope, perhaps determination, flickered in her eyes. She was still weak, still traumatized, but something inside her was beginning to stir. And Bo knew, with a certainty that settled deep in his bones, that this woman was a fighter. He just had to give her the space and the safety to find her strength again. Whispers of recovery. Sarah ascended from a murky abyss, consciousness returning like a hesitant tide. Her eyelids, heavy and resistant, peeled back to reveal a blurred tableau of roughly hewn timbers and subdued light filtering through a diminutive window. The air carried a bracing fragrance of pine, mingled with a comforting, elusive warmth. A jolt of raw panic seized her. Where in God's name was she? Attempting to rise, she was met with a dizzying surge that pinned her against the yielding pillow. A persistent, dull ache pulsed in her skull, a nagging reminder of what exactly? Fleeting images danced at the edge of her awareness. Blurry faces, disembodied voices, the lurch and sway of a wagon, the oppressive weight of darkness. A choked whimper escaped before she could stifle it. A looming silhouette darkened the bedside. "Take it easy now," a resonant voice soothed, edged with concern. "Bull." It was Bo, recollecting the strength of his arms as he lifted her from the wagon. The gentle cadence of his words sliced through the fear, offering a tenuous lifeline. Kneeling, his stormy gray eyes searched hers. "You're safe, Sarah. You're my ranch." That sincere gaze tempered her racing pulse, if only momentarily. What happened?" Her voice, rough as gravel, barely carried. "You were hurt. Badly. I brought you to Montgomery Ranch. You've been unconscious nearly 2 days." He paused, his features softening with compassion. "Those men, they won't find you here. You have my word." 2 days. The lost hours crashed down upon her, stolen by oblivion. The fear intensified, sharpened by a desperate need for clarity. They were taking us south," she rasped, the chilling images assaulting her anew. The petrified faces of her fellow captives, the lascivious stares of their tormentors. Their intention was— The words died in her throat, the memory too brutal to articulate. "Bois déclenché." "I know," he stated, his tone dangerously low. "I intervened. You don't need to recount it." But the need clawed at her. To speak, to understand, to somehow process the trauma. The story spilled forth, fragmented and disjointed, a desperate attempt to impose order on the chaos. She described the savage conditions, the perpetual fear, the erosion of their humanity. Bo listened in resolute silence, a bulwark against the tide of her anguish. As twilight painted the room in hues of purple and gray, Sarah's voice dwindled to silence, spent and emotionally ravaged. The rancher rose and went to the hearth, poking at the dwindling embers until sparks flew up the flue. The fire responded with pops and crackles, a comforting counterpoint to the room's stillness. He set a kettle to simmer over the flames, then turned back, his gaze unwavering. "I'll make some tea. Then you need to rest." Rest. The prospect was both seductive and terrifying. Rest meant surrendering to the darkness, to the demons that awaited there. That night, the nightmares descended with unrelenting ferocity. They dragged her back to the wagon, back to the terror, back to the feeling of utter powerlessness. She thrashed against the coarse bedding, muffled screams trapped in her throat. A gentle hand shook her awake. "Sarah, wake up. It's just a dream." It was Bo, his face creased with worry in the soft glow of a bedside lamp. He sat on the edge of the bed, his presence a solid anchor in the storm. I can't." She choked, gasping for air. They were everywhere. He offered no empty platitudes, no dismissals of her terror. Instead, he simply remained there, his hand resting gently on her arm, offering silent reassurance. "I know," he murmured, "but they're not here now. You're safe." He did not leave. He stayed with her until dawn brushed the room with a delicate, golden light. He spoke in hushed tones, relating tales of the ranch, of the horses he nurtured, of the mountains that ringed their sanctuary. His voice, a soothing balm, gradually quelled the panic raging within her. As the sun climbed higher, bathing the room in warmth, Sarah finally succumbed to sleep, finding a fragile peace. Upon waking, echoes of the nightmare still lingered, but fainter, less menacing. Bo had gone, but the memory of his steadfast presence remained. On the nightstand, she spied a steaming mug of tea and a brief, handwritten note. "Eat. Rest. I'll be back." Simple words, laden with a depth of concern that resonated deeply. As she slowly sipped the tea, its warmth spreading through her veins, Sarah felt a nascent flicker of hope ignite within her. Perhaps, just perhaps, she could begin to mend. Maybe, with Beau's unwavering support, she could navigate the treacherous path toward healing. The journey ahead would be arduous, but for the first time in what felt like an eternity, she wasn't utterly alone. Finding purpose. The nightmares still came, less frequently now, but no less vivid. Sarah would wake gasping, heart hammering against her ribs, the phantom touch of cruel hands lingering on her skin. But now Beau was there. He'd sit on the edge of the bed, offering a silent, comforting presence until the tremors subsided and the fear receded. He never pried, never pressed her to speak of the horrors she'd endured. He simply stayed, a solid anchor in her storm-tossed sea. As her strength returned, Sarah found herself restless. Lying in bed all day, even with the books Beau provided, felt like another form of captivity. One morning, after forcing down a few bites of breakfast, she watched Beau preparing to leave for the stables. "Beau," she asked, her voice still raspy. Is there anything I can do to help? Around the house, I mean." He paused, his brow furrowing slightly. He'd been so careful to protect her, to ensure she had nothing to worry about but healing. The thought of her exerting herself, of reliving any sort of servitude, made him uneasy. "Sarah, you need a rest. You've been through, well, you just need to take it easy." She sat up straighter, a spark of defiance flickering in her eyes. "Resting it's not helping. I need to do something. I can cook, I can clean. I want to be useful." He saw the determination in her gaze, the yearning for purpose, and relented. He couldn't deny her that. "Well," he said slowly, scratching his chin, "I suppose Mrs. Henderson could use a hand with the cooking. She's been doing it all herself, and I know her arthritis has been acting up." Sarah's small smile was reward enough. "I like that very much." Mrs. Henderson, the ranch's cook and housekeeper, was a stout, no-nonsense woman with a kind heart hidden beneath a gruff exterior. She regarded Sarah with a mixture of curiosity and suspicion. "So, you're the one Beau rescued," she said, her voice surprisingly gentle. "Well, child, you look like you could use a good meal and some fresh air." Sarah offered a hesitant smile. "I'm Sarah, and I want to help." Mrs. Henderson, after a moment of assessing Sarah's sincerity, nodded. "All right then, we'll start you off easy. Peel these potatoes, and try not to take off half the potato with the peel like some folks I know." She winked, and Sarah felt a flicker of warmth. The kitchen was a warm, bustling space filled with the aroma of baking bread and simmering stews. Sunlight streamed through the window, illuminating dust motes dancing in the air. Sarah found a simple solace in the rhythmic task of peeling potatoes, the smooth, cool skin against her fingers. Beau found them there later, Sarah diligently peeling potatoes, Mrs. Henderson humming a tuneless melody as she stirred a pot on the stove. The sight eased something within him. Sarah looked lighter, somehow, more present. He leaned against the doorframe, watching them for a moment. "Something smells good, Mrs. Henderson. Venison stew, Mr. Montgomery. Your favorite." She glanced at Sarah. "And Sarah here isn't natural with the potatoes. Neater than I've seen in years." He grinned. "Glad to hear it." He turned to Sarah. "Don't overdo it now." She met his gaze, her expression a mixture of gratitude and something he couldn't quite decipher. "I won't." The days that followed fell into a comfortable rhythm. Sarah helped with the cooking, learning Mrs. Henderson's secret recipes and sharing some of her own, simple but flavorful dishes she'd learned as a girl. She swept floors, dusted furniture, and even ventured out into the garden, helping to weed and water the vegetables. Beau often found her there, kneeling in the dirt, her brow furrowed in concentration as she tended to the plants. He would watch her from a distance, admiring her quiet determination, the way she seemed to find peace in the simple act of nurturing life. Sometimes they would work side by side, repairing a fence or mending harnesses. Their conversations were sparse, but comfortable. He taught her how to handle a rifle, how to ride a horse, gentle lessons, always mindful of her fragility. She, in turn, shared stories of her childhood, of her dreams for the future. Dreams she was beginning to believe might still be possible. The silence between them was never awkward, but filled with an understanding that transcended words. The ranch was becoming more than just a haven. It was a place where she was finding herself again, piece by piece. The fear was still there, lurking beneath the surface, but it no longer consumed her. Now, there was also hope and a growing sense of purpose. The hunter's scent. Dust devils danced in the wake of Jedstone's approach. He rode a skeletal Appaloosa, its ribs showing beneath a patched saddle blanket, mirroring the leanness of the man himself. Stone dismounted in front of the Last Chance Saloon in Harmony Creek, the only establishment offering respite and rotgut for miles. The batwing doors creaked a mournful welcome as he stepped inside, his spurs whispering across the worn wooden floor. The saloon was dim, even for midday. A handful of men huddled over watered-down whiskey, their faces etched with the harsh realities of frontier life. A piano player, his fingers yellowed with nicotine, hammered out a mournful tune, a counterpoint to the nervous energy Stone brought with him. He approached the bar, the silence deepening as he did. The bartender, a burly man with a handlebar mustache and wary eyes, wiped down the already gleaming surface. "Whiskey," Stone rasped, his voice like gravel grinding on bone. The bartender poured a generous measure, his gaze never quite meeting Stone's. "Something else I can get for you, mister?" Stone tossed back the whiskey, the liquor doing little to soften the harsh lines around his mouth. "Information. I'm looking for some lost property." The bartender's eyes flickered nervously. "Lost property is a broad term, friend." "Women," Stone said, the word hanging in the air like a threat. "A wagon load of them, headed south. They seem to have strayed." A ripple of unease ran through the saloon. The piano music faltered, then stopped altogether. One of the men by the window quietly spat into a spittoon. "Haven't seen anything like that," the bartender said, his voice tight. Stone leaned closer, his eyes, the color of a winter sky, boring into the bartender's. "Word is someone might have taken an interest in them. A lone cowboy, perhaps, riding a fine horse." The bartender hesitated, wiping the counter again, harder this time. "Rumors fly around here like tumbleweeds, mister. Hard to say what's true and what ain't." Stone placed a silver dollar on the counter. "This is for the truth. And a warning. Obstruction is unwise." The bartender's Adam's apple bobbed. "Heard tell the fella. Riding north a few days back. Alone. Didn't see no women with him, but he was headed in that direction." He pointed vaguely towards the north. "Big fella. Good looking. Too good looking for his own good, some might say. Riding a black stallion." Stone pocketed the remaining change. "Name? Didn't catch it. Folks around here mostly keep to themselves." The bartender swallowed hard. "But they said he had a ranch. Somewhere up north." Stone nodded slowly. "A ranch. Interesting." He turned to leave, his spurs again whispering on the wooden floor. As he reached the doorway, he paused, turning back to face the room. Some men are best left undisturbed. Interfering with their business can have consequences. His gaze swept over the occupants of the saloon, a silent promise of pain in its depths. Outside, Stone mounted his Appaloosa, the horse shifting nervously beneath him. The dust devils seemed to have grown bolder, swirling around him like restless spirits. He turned the horse north, a grim smile playing on his lips. The hunt was on, and Jedstone always got his quarry. The air grew heavy, charged with the knowledge of his relentless pursuit. Harmony Creek, once a quiet, if desperate, outpost, now held its breath, waiting for the storm to break. The scent of fear, mingled with the dust, hung thick in the air, a testament to the hunter's presence. Preparing for the storm. The air was thick and motionless, heavy with the promise of a brewing tempest. Bo felt the impending trouble deep down, a clenching premonition that tightened his gut and mirrored the rigid set of his jaw. Stone's arrival was as certain as the sunrise. Sarah emerged from the cabin, her expression questioning. The past weeks had filled out her face, bringing a delicate color to her cheeks. Though still vulnerable, the light had returned to her eyes, no longer dull and lifeless. He'd coaxed laughter from her lips again, a sound more precious than any melody. He wouldn't allow Stone to steal that joy. "Ready?" he asked, nodding toward the corral where Buttercup, a gentle mare, stood waiting. Sarah hesitated, her gaze shifting between the horse and Beau's face. "I'm not sure I can." "You will." He guided her to Buttercup, murmuring reassurances to the animal while showing Sarah how to offer her hand. "She's a sweetheart. Just be gentle, as she'll treat you right." The morning unfolded with Beau patiently instructing her, explaining the use of the reins, the subtle pressure of her legs, the flow of the horse's movement. Initially, Sarah was tense, clinging to the saddle horn as if it were a lifeline. Yet, with each turn around the enclosure, her self-assurance blossomed. The lingering apprehension in her eyes gradually dissolved, replaced by a glint of exhilaration. By midday, she managed a sedate trot, her posture improving, her grip becoming less frantic. The wind tugged at her hair, and she laughed, a sound that resonated deep within Beau's soul. Later, in the dim coolness of the barn, Beau placed an old Winchester rifle on the workbench. It was worn but meticulously cared for. Sarah flinched. "I don't want to touch that." "I understand. But you need to know how. Not to initiate, but to defend yourself. To protect us." He verified the rifle was unloaded. "This isn't a plaything, Sarah. It's a tool. A final option." He demonstrated the proper grip, the aiming technique, the operation of the lever. He stressed safety protocols, repeating them until they were ingrained in her mind. He talked about sight lines, projectile paths, and the importance of a steady hand. Sarah listened intently, her brow furrowed in concentration. She learned quickly, absorbing his words with a quiet intensity. When she finally brought the rifle to her shoulder, her stance possessed a surprising firmness. "You have a natural aptitude," Beau remarked, impressed. "I picked up a few things where I was," she replied softly, her voice barely audible. Beau didn't pry. He knew she'd confide in him when she was ready. Instead, he adjusted her grip, ensuring it was secure but relaxed. They practiced for hours, using discarded cans as targets. Initially, Sarah's shots went wide, sending puffs of dust in all directions. But steadily, her accuracy improved. Her shots drew closer, more consistent. A flicker of dark satisfaction touched her features when she finally struck a can, sending it tumbling. As dusk approached, casting the sky in shades of fire and lavender, they cleaned the rifle together. The silence that enveloped them was comfortable, filled with mutual comprehension. "Thank you, Beau," Sarah said, her voice gentle, "for everything you've done." He met her gaze, his heart aching with a profound tenderness. "There's a strength in you that you haven't recognized yet, Sarah Chun. Never lose sight of it." That night, a violent storm shook the ranch, mirroring the unrest within him. He lay awake, listening to the howling wind and the torrential rain. He knew Stone was out there, lurking somewhere in the shadows, hunting them. Yet, he also knew Sarah was no longer the broken woman he'd discovered beside the road. She was still healing, still carried her scars, but she was also strong. She was learning to defend herself, not simply to survive, but to build a life. He drifted into sleep, the vision of Sarah's resolute face emblazoned in his thoughts. He would confront Stone, defend what was his. But he wouldn't underestimate Sarah. She, too, was bracing herself for the storm. Echoes of the past. The campfire popped, sending sparks cartwheeling toward the star-dusted abyss overhead. Beau added another section of oak, the flare briefly illuminating Sarah's countenance. He'd been quiet for an extended time, observing her, still seeing the lingering specters in her expression despite her evident recovery. The moment felt right. Time to offer more than just a haven. "Ranching wasn't always my life," he began, the words a gravelly rasp. "I spent years with the Texas Rangers." Sarah's gaze lifted, meeting his squarely. "Protecting people? Trying to," Beau conceded, the recollection leaving a bitter tang. "Mostly chasing outlaws and rustlers. But there was other business, things that made me turn my star." He didn't elaborate further. Some wounds fester too deeply to expose easily. Instead, he picked up a slender branch and prodded the heart of the fire, coaxing the coals. Had you ever saved anyone before? Sarah's question was almost inaudible. Beau's hand froze. He pictured faces, the countless faces of those he'd failed. No, he admitted truthfully. Not like this. The quiet deepened between them, thick with unspoken histories. At last, Sarah's resolve seemed to gather, her voice gaining timbre. My given name is Sarah Chun. Not merely Sarah. It was a present, a shard of her identity offered forward. Beau returned her look, acknowledging the trust with a solemn nod. Beau Montgomery, he answered, giving his full name in return. She hesitated, then began to speak, her narrative initially hesitant, gradually gathering momentum. I was raised in a small village in China. My father, he yearned for a more promising future for me. He liquidated everything to finance my journey to America. I was promised work as a seamstress to wire money back home. Her voice faltered, and she swallowed thickly. But upon arrival, there existed no seamstress position, only men and shadow. The campfire snapped and hissed, echoing the discord within Sarah. Beau remained silent, affording her the space to speak, to release the burden she had carried close to her heart. They stole my name, my garments, my dignity, she continued, her enunciation flat, devoid of effect. I was just an object, a tool to be exploited and discarded. She looked at her hands, turning them over as though belonging to another individual. I believed I would perish. Beau's stomach clenched with raw protectiveness. He longed to touch her, to embrace her, but he sensed such physical contact might be overwhelming, premature. Keeping his tone even and muted, he said, "You didn't die. You survived it." Sarah offered a wan smile. "Because of you." He shrugged, uneasy with praise. "You survived because of your innate resilience, Sarah Chun. Stronger than you realize." They sat in stillness once more, the exclusive sounds consisting of the fire's percussion and a distant coyote's lament. The surrounding air felt changed, electrified by a newfound closeness. They were no longer simply savior and saved, but instead two souls who had glimpsed the abyss and somehow located a path back toward hope. Beau ended the silence. "Stone will arrive soon," he observed, stating the self-evident. "He'll anticipate vulnerability." Sarah's eyes shuddered, the fleeting fragility replaced by a flickering spark of resistance. "I will be prepared," she stated resolutely. "I will not be a victim one more time." Beau gave a firm nod, a muted contentment settling upon him. He had noticed the force dwelling within her, the hardiness concealed underneath layers of dread and suffering. It was now emerging, blooming like a desert bloom following a prolonged dry spell. He rose, stretching his aching frame. "Come," he directed, extending his hand. "Let's catch some sleep. Tomorrow, we begin preparations." Sarah clasped his hand, her fingers interweaving among his. The contact sparked, a subtle promise of shared fortitude and constant assurance. While they walked back toward the rough-hewn cabin, Beau realized that whatever awaited them on the morrow, they would confront it as one. The echoes of prior events lingered, yet those memories no longer ruled them. They were forging a new destiny, illuminated by the soft radiance of hope and the persistent dedication to endure. Siege at dawn. A blush of dawn touched the horizon, staining the sky with shades of lavender and nascent gold. A lone rooster's call echoed, absorbed by the vast stillness of the plains. Inside the ranch house, Beau was already awake, the fragrant steam of Sarah's jasmine tea a comforting presence. He sat at the table, meticulously cleaning his Winchester, the click and rasp of metal a familiar rhythm. Then, the quiet exploded. Gunfire tore through the awakening day, chewing through timber and shattering glass. Instinct propelled Beau to the floor, the chair he'd occupied collapsing under a storm of lead. "Sarah!" he bellowed, scrambling toward the bedroom. She was already in motion, wresting a rifle from beneath the bed, its use a skill he'd imparted only days before. Her face, drained of color, held a focused intensity. The terrified woman he'd rescued seemed a distant memory. "They're here," she stated, her voice remarkably even. "Stay behind me," Bo commanded, knowing full well she wouldn't. He snatched up his rifle and edged to the front door, peering through a narrow gap. Riders encircled the ranch, Jed Stone at their forefront, his features twisted into a mask of rage. "Montgomery!" Stone roared, his voice a weapon that sliced across the yard. "Come out and face us, you gutless dog. Hand over the woman, and we might consider letting you live." Bo spat on the worn floorboards. "You want her, Stone? Come try to take her." He yanked open the door, firing a shot that sent Stone's mount rearing in panic. The battle commenced. Back to back, Bo and Sarah used the house as their bulwark. Bo, a ranger hardened by years of frontier life, moved with seasoned efficiency, his shots economical and lethal. Sarah, however, astonished him. She wielded the rifle with unexpected competence, her aim surprisingly keen. She learned quickly, her fear transformed into a fierce determination, fueled by the recollections of the oppressive darkness she'd escaped. "They're flanking," Sarah cried out, indicating a group of men maneuvering around the building's flank. "I see them," Bo acknowledged, rapidly weighing their options. "We need to reach the barn. It offers better cover." "How?" Sarah asked, anxiety threading her voice. "We make a break for it," Bo declared, seizing her hand. "On my mark." He unleashed a barrage, keeping the attackers suppressed, then roared, "Now!" They bolted across the exposed ground, the air buzzing with lethal projectiles. Sarah stumbled, and Bo hauled her upright, shielding her with his body. They reached the barn, throwing their weight against the heavy wooden doors. Inside, the air hung thick with the scent of dried hay and gritty dust. Bo hastily reinforced the doors with a barricade of wooden crates. "That'll buy us a little breathing room," he said, gasping for breath. "What now?" Sarah inquired, her eyes wide with apprehension. Bo gazed at her, seeing not the fragile woman he had once rescued, but a warrior, a survivor forged in the crucible of fear. "Now," he said, a hard smile playing on his lips, "we show them what it means to trespass." They located a small window overlooking the yard and resumed firing, methodically taking down the invaders. Stone's men were relentless, yet Bo and Sarah were resolute in their defense of this sanctuary. They fought with a savage intensity, knowing their very survival hinged on it. As the sun ascended, painting the sky with fire, the conflict continued unabated. The atmosphere reeked of spent gunpowder and echoed with the agonized cries of the wounded. Outnumbered, yet defiant, Bo and Sarah refused any possibility of surrender. They would contend until their final breath, safeguarding their home, their liberty, and the fragile bond they had discovered in each other's embrace. A promise of tomorrow. The barn reeked of carnage. A cloying miasma of cordite, spilled life, and raw terror saturated the air. Bo leaned against a stack of hay, his left arm dangling, unresponsive. His shirt front was rapidly darkening, a blossoming stain of crimson. Sarah, her face streaked with grime and etched with weariness, ripped strips from a humble flour sack, her movements surprisingly deft. "Easy now," she murmured, her voice a soothing balm against the chaos. She pressed the makeshift compress to his side, her touch feather-light despite the dire circumstances. Though the bullet had merely creased his flesh, the wound wept freely. Superficial, but it must be cleansed. Bo flinched, swallowing any complaint. Observing her ministrations, a conflicted blend of pride and self-reproach washed over him. He'd embroiled her in this nightmare. Yet, she showed unwavering resolve. The fragile woman who had sought refuge at his ranch had vanished, replaced by someone tempered in adversity. "They'll be back," he croaked, his throat raw. "Stone won't relinquish his prize without a fight." Sarah's gaze locked with his, lamplight glinting in her eyes. "Then we'll be long gone." She secured the bandage's knot. "Fit to ride?" "I have to be," he grunted. He pushed himself upright, testing the injured limb. A sharp lance of agony pierced him, yet he found it bearable. Saddle 2 mounts. Conserve what provisions remain. Minutes later, they fled into the inky embrace of the night, its obscurity their sole guardian. The impending storm finally unleashed its fury. Rain lashed down, transforming the trail into a treacherous mire. The wind shrieked like a tormented spirit, clawing at their garments. "We need sanctuary," Sarah yelled above the tempest's roar. Bo nodded grimly, his jaw tight against the throbbing pain. He recalled a modest cave higher up the slope, frequented by shepherds during the lambing season. A desperate gamble, but their only recourse. The ascent proved perilous. The horses faltered and slid on the slick stones. Bo, debilitated by his wound, fought to maintain his seat. Sarah rode close beside him, her presence a beacon in the storm. They reached the cave mouth as the storm reached its crescendo. Barely more than an overhanging ledge, it offered scant shelter from the elements. They huddled together, teeth chattering, the horses skittish beside them. Sarah coaxed a small fire to life with a meager supply of dry wood she located. The flickering flames painted ghostly shadows on the cave's interior. The warmth was a reprieve, yet scarcely quelled the creeping dread. Bo watched Sarah nurse the fire, her actions economical and elegant. He glimpsed a new spirit in her eyes, a nascent hope, a burgeoning defiance. The woman he had rescued was now reclaiming herself. As the night bled into dawn, the tempest gradually abated. By sunrise, the rain had ceased, and the clouds parted, revealing glimpses of azure sky. The world emerged cleansed, shimmering with pristine light. "We can't linger," Bo rasped, his voice still rough. "They'll be on our trail." They rode for 2 more days, plunging deeper into the rugged embrace of the mountains. The terrain became increasingly untamed, uncompromising. They encountered no trace of Stone or his cohorts. Hope began to flicker within Bo, whispering of escape. On the 3rd day, they stumbled upon a modest town nestled in a sheltered valley. It possessed a charm of quaint homes and trustworthy inhabitants, a sanctuary from the ordeal they had endured. Bo knew Sarah couldn't remain with him. Stone would inevitably find her. Here, she could vanish, forge a new identity. He secured lodging for her at the town's only boarding house, presided over by a kindly widow named Mrs. Abernathy. "She deserves a chance for a clean slate," Bo confided to Mrs. Abernathy, pressing a wad of banknotes into her hand. "Offer her employment, if you can, and safeguard her." Mrs. Abernathy nodded sagely, her eyes brimming with compassion. "I will, son. You have my word." That evening, Bo stood with Sarah on the town's outskirts, the setting sun daubing the firmament with fiery hues. The air was invigorating and crisp, laden with the aroma of pine and dewy earth. "You'll be safe here," he murmured, his voice heavy with suppressed emotion. Sarah turned to him, her gaze a mixture of gratitude and sorrow. "Thank you, Bo, for everything." He reached for her hand, his fingers interlacing with hers. "You owe me no gratitude. You saved yourself, Sarah." A protracted silence hung between them, laden with unspoken words. "What will become of you?" she finally asked. "I'll return," he stated, his jaw clenched. "I'll ensure Stone can't menace anyone else." Sarah squeezed his hand in silent understanding. "Be careful." "I will." He hesitated, then added, perhaps one day, when this is all behind us." The sentence remained incomplete, yet its meaning was palpable. He released her hand. "Farewell, Sarah. Farewell, Bo." He pivoted and strode away, forcing himself not to glance back. He knew that if he did, he would be unable to depart. Mounting his horse, he rode toward the horizon, leaving Sarah silhouetted against the twilight sky, a solitary figure on the edge of town. He carried the memory of her valor, her tenacity, her quiet strength, etched into his soul. A promise of a future, a cause to persevere. He would be back,